February 26th, 2022. Russia had just launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. 1 hour before the first shot, a cyber attack destroyed Viasat, the main satellite company providing communications to the Ukrainian armed forces. The connectivity of an entire country simply vanished. In the dark, with no communication, a nation being invaded. The next morning, Ukraine's Minister of Digital Transformation sent a tweet to Elon Musk, a short, almost desperate line, "We need Starlink." Musk replied the same day. 48 hours later, SpaceX had switched on the service across all of Ukraine, and the first shipment of terminals was already on its way. SpaceX had negotiated that activation a month and a half before the invasion. Everything was ready, waiting for formal approval. When the war began, there was no more room for diplomacy. What Starlink did for Ukraine in 2022 was not just an internet connection. It was the instant rebuilding of a state that was being destroyed. By April that year, the government was already using Starlink as official infrastructure. The president's live broadcasts, communication between mobile operators, the trains of the Ukrainian railway, all of it depended on those terminals. Hundreds of schools and hospitals were connected. 50,000 people were using the system every day by May. In besieged cities, where there was no phone signal left, civilians could at least talk to their families. Soldiers made video calls with their wives while under direct fire. This did not exist in conventional war. Communication had become a weapon, and someone had just handed that weapon for free to one side of the conflict. By 2023, Starlink was no longer an emergency backup. It was the central nervous system of the Ukrainian armed forces. Every military unit had at least one terminal, many of them camouflaged. The system allowed thousands of drones to operate at the same time, and that completely changed the nature of war. Today, drones account for about 60% of all damage on the front line, against 40% for traditional artillery. 60%. The artillery that ruled battlefields for centuries was overtaken by flying machines guided by satellite signal. Starlink's antennas use narrow beams that are hard to jam. When they detect interference, they jump on their own to another satellite. The data is encrypted end to end. There was nothing in the Russian arsenal that could take it down with a single blow. The Rand Corporation revealed that Chinese military analysts studied this model obsessively. China launched Project Satnet as a national priority to build its own version of Starlink. The reason is simple. Chinese military strategy depends on cutting off exactly this kind of connection from the enemy, and Starlink destroyed that capability. Here is where the story gets genuinely disturbing. In 2022, during an operation to retake occupied Crimea, Ukraine asked SpaceX to extend Starlink coverage to the peninsula. Musk refused. The public justification was American sanctions against Russia, but the decision stopped Ukraine from striking in areas that would have been decisive. The New York Times later revealed that Musk feared Ukraine would use Starlink not just to defend itself, but to counterattack and reclaim territory. He reportedly said in private that Ukraine was going too far by threatening to defeat the Kremlin. Think about what that means. A private citizen, owner of a private company, with veto power over the military operations of a sovereign nation. There was no treaty, no vote in any parliament, no democratic decision of any kind. One man had a private conversation, and the military strategy of an invaded country changed. At the time, the international reaction was almost silent. Everyone was focused on other problems, but the precedent had already been set. February 2026. SpaceX applied new restrictions on Starlink terminals to block Russia's unauthorized access. The effect was immediate and devastating. Russian military channels filled with panic. One Russian soldier filmed himself kicking his own Starlink terminal across the ground in frustration. Another posted a video using the receiver as a dinner table with nothing else left to do with it. A Russian blogger wrote, "In a single night, we fell all the way back to the Stone Age. Entire sectors of the Russian army stopped functioning. A Ukrainian electronic warfare expert said Russian attacks stalled on multiple fronts. The enemy is in catastrophe, he said. A mortar commander confirmed, things got much quieter. They were slowed down by at least a month. What these reports do not say outright is this: someone inside SpaceX pressed a button, and the military force of a nuclear power lost combat capability. Who made that decision? Based on what? We do not know. SpaceX did not comment. Foreign Policy magazine summed up the phenomenon in the exact word: Starlink privatized geopolitics, and the numbers back it up. By mid-2025, SpaceX had more than 9,000 Starlink satellites in orbit. In January 2026, American regulators approved 7,500 more, pushing the projected total to nearly 17,000. The company is cleared to reach 42,000 satellites. The company operates in 160 markets and has more than 10 million active customers. Amazon's competitor has just over 200 satellites. The third largest has around 650. Starlink is a near monopoly with no rival in sight. In Libya, Sudan, Gaza, Iran, in dozens of conflict zones, smuggled Starlink terminals are the only connection to the outside world. When Iran cut the internet to 4% of normal during the 2026 protests, thousands of terminals let images of the crackdown reach the world. The Trump administration secretly sent 6,000 kits into the country, treating the terminals as a tool of foreign policy. Starlink had become diplomacy, and now the part no one wants to face. But that is becoming impossible to ignore. In 2026, researchers created a warning system called the collision clock. The question it answers is direct. If satellites suddenly could no longer dodge one another because of a solar storm or a software failure, how long until the first collision in orbit? The answer today is 5.5 days. 5.5 days. In 2018, that same calculation gave 164 days. The number collapsed in just 7 years. The problem is density. Starlink massively occupies the orbit at 550 kilometers, the most crowded level of all. On average, every 2 minutes, a Starlink satellite performs a maneuver to avoid a collision. That is more than 250,000 maneuvers a year. The entire constellation is dropping to lower and lower orbits, fleeing the very traffic it created. The most frightening part is that the worst-case scenario, the so-called Kessler syndrome, may have already begun in parts of the orbit. It works like this. When there are too many objects up there, one collision creates fragments, which cause new collisions, which create more fragments, in a cycle that feeds itself. Once it passes a certain point, the process takes decades to settle, because at that altitude the air is so thin that the debris takes centuries to fall. In 2007, China destroyed a satellite with a missile and created 3,000 large trackable pieces and tens of thousands of smaller fragments. The 2009 collision between two satellites added even more, and now we are adding thousands of new satellites with every launch into the same orbit. The next major solar storm, which could throw the atmosphere into chaos and shift the orbits of thousands of satellites at once, could happen at any moment. This is not science fiction, it is basic physics. The space that keeps the world's communications, finances, and militaries running is more congested than at any point in history, and we do not have a plan for it.